Today, we become legends.
Alright guys, and welcome back to the final item alignment chart video, at least for now, unless I think of any other ones that I can do in the future. And of course, today's one is going to be Bruiser items. So those items in Smite that aren't really full tank and they aren't really full damage either. They have a little mix of both stats that you generally build on, like more defensive assassins or more aggressive warriors, maybe some aggressive guardians can make use of these items, things like that. And I think once again, like I did in the tank items alignment chart, I'll place them in groups. So I'll place like all the shields together, then I'll place all the like relic dagger, wingblade, witchblade together and stuff like that. And once again, a disclaimer, some of these items will have showed up in other videos before, like I think Berserker Shield was on the damage items chart for physicals, and like Wingblade and Witchblade were on the tank items alignment chart. It just happens, you know, the Bruiser items are a mix of tank and damage, so sometimes they will appear on other alignment charts as well. But I do have what I believe to be every Bruiser item in the game on this one, and there's 22 of them, so let's just jump right in. Or not jump right in, actually, I need to quickly explain the axes here. So we have the y-axis, which is damage and tankiness. So items placed further towards the bottom of the alignment chart, they generally give more tanky stats with like a little bit of damage. And then more towards the top, they generally give more damage stats with a little bit of tankiness. And then of course the classic early late game on the x-axis. More towards the left, you're built more early in your build, sort of like first or second slot. More towards the right, you're built like later in the build, 5th and 6th slot. And then in the middle, you're looking like your 3rd and 4th slot kind of mid-game. But yeah, since Anchile is the first item, we'll just get started with the shields. So Anchile is mostly like an early game item, I feel like. You know, you can make use of this late game as like a tech pickup against like an Anubis mid, for example. You know, you just buy this and then his Plague of Locusts just like silences him out of it immediately, which is pretty nice. But generally, I feel like this is built sort of like early to mid game in like solo laner builds and stuff as like their magical defense if it counters the enemy mid quite hard. And then I feel like this one maybe skews slightly towards damage. You know, it has some cooldown reduction, a fair amount of power. I think it only has a little bit of magical protection, and that's basically it, unless you count the passive as protection. So we'll put this one slightly up towards damage, maybe actually it's about there. And then let's get the other ones from the same like magical defense shield trees. So we'll do Runic Shield here. It's built in a similar slot to Anchile, so in terms of early late game, you're probably looking at about the same. Perhaps Runic is slightly more early game, because like I said, Anchile can be picked up as like a tech pickup late game against certain mid laners, whereas Runic Shield's sort of just something you kind of buy early and as like your early magical defense and you're happy with it. In terms of Runic Shield, I think it's a little bit more towards the tanky than Anchile is though, because its passive does reduce enemy power, which effectively gives you protections, kind of, if you think about it that way. So it makes you more tanky, basically. So I think this one does deserve to be a little further down. We have Cad Shield, kind of an interesting one. You know, obviously it doesn't build into only magical defense, has a mix of both and increases your healing. In general, I feel like this has like fairly defensive stats. You know, it has some health, it has some power, the passive like heals you, it has protections and stuff like that. And then in terms of early late with Cad Shield, I feel like it's like a little bit skewed late game. It's not something you build like second item or anything, but it's also not something you like round off your build with. It's generally something you build in like 4th slot, 5th slot, maybe 3rd slot if you're being quite greedy and you have a character that works really well with it. So we'll drop it right here. Next up we have the whole physical shield line. So we've done the magical shields, let's do the physical shield. So we have Berserker Shield. This one is going to be like the most damage skewed of all of them. You know, Berserker Shield at this point is almost a damage item with the amount they've changed it. You know, they've really upped the offensive stats on it, but kind of nerfed a lot of the defensive stats. So now it comes with like tons of attack speed, tons of power, tons of pen. The passive gives you more attack speed and power. You know, the only thing that's defensive about this item really is the fact that it gives like 30 or something physical protections. But other than that, yeah, it deserves to be entirely at the top of the alignment chart here. And then in terms of early late game, I feel like Berserker Shield generally gets built pretty early. You know, you're on like your Bellonas and your Amaterasus building it first item in solo. You know, back in the day, I'm not sure if Hunters even still do this anymore. They probably don't, but back in the day, you would sometimes rush Berserker Shield in the ADC role as well. I feel like it's generally more of an early game item. And then of course, right at the top of the damage tanky axis. Next shield for that would be Glad Shield. So Glad Shield is a little bit more tanky focused than Berserker Shield, but it's still one of the more damage focused Bruiser items, that's for sure. In terms of early late game, it's a little bit later than Zerk Shield. You know, Glad Shield, you can go at first item actually, and it's not terrible, but generally with Glad Shield you go like 1 or 2 defense items before you buy it, because it scales off of protections from items, so you want to have a bunch of protections from items before you buy this one. So we will skew it a little bit more late game. Maybe we'll put it like right in the middle or something like that, you know, built right in the middle of your build. And actually thinking about it, it's probably less damage oriented than Anchile, so maybe if we move Anchile up a bit and move Glad Shield down to like there. Next up we have Shifter Shield. So once again, similar to Berserker Shield, this is going to be one of the more damage focused of the Bruiser items, you know. Shifter Shield gives like more power if you're above 75% health, I believe it is now, and more protections if you're below 75% health, so it definitely changes based on how damage and tanky it is, based on how much health you have, but I feel like most people buy Shifter Shield for just like the clean 60 power that you get when you're at like full health for like engaging and stuff like that, so I'm going to skew it a little bit more towards damage. Despite the fact that when you are below 75% health, it does have solid protections. It gets like 40 of each or something like that, which is pretty solid. So we'll drop it like there or something. And then in terms of early late, I feel like Shifter Shield's generally built kind of like mid-game. It's not your second item or anything, but it's also not something you like top your build off with. It's like a mid-game item, so we'll drop it like there. And the final physical shield, we have Void Shield. So generally, this one is like a little bit more tanky focused, I would say. You know, obviously has the classic combo of some protections and some health, which is always really good. Has a little bit of power on it, and then also that physical penetration or like physical protection reduction aura, same thing. Does come into play a lot, and that does add some damage to the item. So maybe I will drop Void Shield on like a similar level to Runic Shield. I think that's pretty fair. And then in terms of early late game, you know, Void Shield used to be like a rush when it had flat pen on it, but now that it's percent pen, it's definitely built a little bit more late game. I feel like somewhere around where CAD Shield will be in your build is probably about where you want to get Void Shield. And next up we have the hammers, first being Blackthorn. So the hammers to me are kind of like the quintessential Bruiser items in that they're right in the middle of damage and tanky. I feel like most of the hammers have like a good amount of like tanky stats versus damage stats. You know, a lot of them have tons of health and stuff like that. Obviously that they will vary between each hammer, but I feel like in general the hammers are the most kind of bruisery of the Bruiser items, if you get me. In terms of Blackthorn Hammer, I feel like you're generally building this early to mid-game, you know, in like your second or third slot, maybe your first if you're feeling ballsy, but generally you don't get just like a health item in your first slot, you get some defense. But somewhere around there is fine, and yeah, like I said, Blackthorn Hammer has tons of health, but also a decent amount of power, some cooldown reduction, mana, MP5, that kind of stuff. I feel like just generally sort of like right in the middle is pretty fair, but maybe I'll skew it like ever so slightly towards the tanky side. Next up we have Frostbound Hammer, so once again a very similar thing, you know, has a lot of health, has some damage as well, has a passive that I wouldn't class as damage, but it kind of is damage because it keeps people in range for your damage. So this one probably skews slightly more towards damage than Blackthorn did. It's a bit more of an aggressive option, Frostbound Hammer. And then I think it's about where it should be, honestly, in terms of early late game, because it's generally like a mid-game item, Frostbound. Once again, it's not something you're rushing in first slot usually, but you'll get it in like third or fourth slot and be pretty happy with it. We have Runeforged Hammer, heavily underutilized in my opinion. I think this item's very strong on certain characters. This one skews a little bit more towards damage, you know, it has like, I believe, 55 physical power or something like that, or at least it used to, it might have less now, and like a little bit of health, and obviously the passive is damage, so we will skew this one like a little higher than Frostbound Hammer, somewhere like there. And then in terms of early late, once again, I feel like a lot of the hammers are kind of like mid-game powerhouse items, so we'll leave Runeforged like there. And finally, we have Sledge. So Sledge is probably the most defensive of the hammers, I would say, because, you know, it has CCR, it has a passive that gives you more protections, it obviously has the trademark, like, high amount of health that a lot of the hammers have, but then it does also have some power and stuff as well. I'd say it's probably on a similar level to CAD Shield in terms of defensive, aggressive. And then early late, it's definitely quite early, it's probably a similar level to Blackthorn Hammer, you know, you build them in the same place, really, you just... Depending on the meta, you pick which is better out of Sledge and Blackthorn Hammer, and then you buy them in the same slot. Usually you don't buy both in one build. It's a bit overkill, so we'll put them basically right there. We have one random outlier here from the book tree. That's a Bruiser item, and that's of course Book of the Dead, the one that gives you a shield based on your maximum mana, if you don't know, because like no one builds this item. This one's pretty defensive, I would say. You know, comes with some health, I believe, might have some cooldown reduction, obviously has some mana, and then, the big health shield, like the entire passive is basically defensive to make you tanky. But then, once again, it is a book item from one of the mage trees, so it does have a lot of power, and it is a little bit of an aggressive item as well. In terms of early late, you're building this generally fairly late, because you want to get your mana from items online very, very quickly, so you can get the huge shield from Book of the Dead. So somewhere around there is probably alright. Let's do the helms. So we have Celestial Legion Helm here. This is the one that while you're out of combat, it stacks up physical protections on you for like the first hit, so like the first hit you take is going to deal quite a bit less damage. It has like a pretty good balance of stats, if I remember correctly, but then the passive is like definitely defensive skewed, so we'll skew it down here towards tanky. And then in terms of early late game, no one even builds Celestial Legion Helm, realistically, but I feel like if they were going to build it, it's probably a fairly early game item, you know, somewhere around these guys, so we'll drop it like there. Jade Emperor's Crown. Oh, I got Ethereal Staff. You know what, we'll place Ethereal Staff right now. So Ethereal Staff is like more damage skewed, of course. The passive does damage, but also does make you more tanky. Has some health, but also has some damage. But I think it does skew more towards damage. And then in terms of early late game, it's more of a late game item. E-Staff's not something you're rushing. It's percent health, the passive, so you generally want to be getting it online a little later. It's very much like a Bruiser, Mage, or like Guardian item from solo, stuff like that. Probably somewhere around there. And now let's actually place Jade Emperor's Crown. So this one is more early game for sure. It's generally a support item that you get like right after your Thebes or something like that, in place of where you would normally get Sovereignty. You can buy this. And in terms of damage tanky, it's pretty tanky because it's similar to Runic Shield in terms of that it like reduces enemy power. It's kind of like a physical equivalent to Runic Shield actually, so it should probably be around the same place in terms of damage tanky. Because it has some damage stats, has some defensive stats, but then also has a passive that reduces enemy physical power, which definitely makes you more tanky. We have Lotus Crown, an interesting one, because obviously you only build this on healer gods, but in general, I feel like it's quite defensive. It comes with a lot of protections, comes with a passive that increases your protections as well. It's probably about as defensive as like Book of the Dead and Celestial Legion Helm, if not even a little bit more. And in terms of early late, I feel like healers generally get this quite early. You buy this on like maybe Terra support or something right after your Thebes, or you buy it on like Afro mid right after your first item, something like that. And finally we have Tyrannical Plate Helm. Once again, an early item. It's like kind of a rush in solo on like high pressure Guardians, things like that. And it's quite damage focused, this one. I feel like, it comes with more power than it comes with protections. It does have CCR, not CDR, CCR, so crowd control reduction. But generally, like, it's quite an aggressive passive. Like, you're looking to push the lane and stuff like that. So it's probably a little bit more damage focused, somewhere around there. Let's do the blades. So Relic Dagger, generally, like, obviously it gives very tanky stats, but the passive allows you to be more aggressive with like reduced cooldowns on blinks and things like that. So I will put it like somewhere in the middle. And then it's generally like, it's kind of the middle as well in terms of early late. You build Relic Dagger kind of right in the middle of your build. It's not usually a rush, but like supports often like it right after their Thebes, or like after their Thebes and their Sovereignty, they'll buy this, stuff like that. Junglers like it after like their primary damage items once they're online, so maybe we'll just put it right in the middle. Winged Blade, so definitely more defensive, that's for sure. It pretty much only comes with defensive stats as far as I'm aware with Winged Blade, unless you count cooldown reduction as an offensive stat. And then once again, the passive is defensive. So I think this pretty much has to be like right at the bottom of tanky. There's not really an item on here that's going to be more tanky than Wingblade, I won't say. It's arguable whether I should even include the blades. And then in terms of early late, it's probably right in the middle. Wingblade is like, it's not necessarily a mid-game item, but it's an item you build whenever you feel like you need it, which is why I'm going to put it in the middle. You don't have to build it late, you don't have to build it early, you don't have to build it mid, you can build it whenever you need to build it, basically. Witchblade is a similar thing, so I'll probably put this one also in the middle, but it's a little bit more of like aggressive. The stat distribution on Wingblade is a little more aggressive than Wingblade, so we'll put it slightly above it. And finally, we have the stones, Stone of File and Void Stone. So Stone of File got reworked a million times. Right now, I believe it does percent damage reduction on basic attack hits, something like that. Which is just really strange. You want this on like a magical god that uses basic attacks, but is also tanky. So you generally don't want this on like Freya or Chronos all on Sol. But you don't want it on a Guardian either, because Guardians do not have high attack speed. It's kind of a very weird item. Maybe you build it in like Ring Sylvanas builds or something like that. But in general, it's quite defensive, defensive stats gives you a damage mitigation passive, stuff like that, so it's probably right down here. And then, like, early, late, once again, no one builds it, so where do I even put it? I'll just put it, like, somewhere in the middle-ish. And finally, Void Stone. So Void Stone got the Void Shield treatment in terms of that its passive is now percent pen and not flat pen, otherwise it'd be right towards the early game. And as a result, it's fallen off a little bit for Guardian versus Guardian matchups in solo. This used to be the absolute go-to for a Guardian versus Guardian, or like Guardian versus Mage matchup. So I'll put it a little bit more towards the mid game now, because it's possible you would go one item and then Void Stone rather than rush it in solo. And then in terms of damage utility, like damage tankiness, I feel like obviously the passive is pen, it comes with some power, but then again, shouldn't I put it on like a similar level to Void Shield because they're basically the same item? I probably should, right? Thinking about it, Void Shield should be a little bit more aggressive because it does come with pen. So if we put Void Shield like there and put Void Stone on the same level, because it makes sense to have items that are kind of like mirrors of each other on a very similar level. Same thing with Jade Emperor's Crown and Runic Shield. They're physical magical mirrors of each other. And so yeah, I think that'll do it for the Bruiser items alignment chart. A pretty interesting one. We see a general cluster towards the middle because that's kind of what Bruiser items try to be. They try and be a mix of damage tanky and a mix of early late. That's generally what they try and be. But obviously you have your standouts, you have stuff like Berserker Shield and Tyrannical and Jade Emperors that are rushed like first or second item. And then you have your more late game pickups like your Void Shield and your E-Staff, your Book of the Dead, that kind of stuff. And yeah, that'll be the last alignment chart for the series, so it's been a fun journey with you guys. Hopefully if you watched all of these videos, I really appreciate it. And I will probably still do more alignment charts in the future. I'm just not sure. I don't really have any ideas right now for ones that I could do. But yeah, be sure to subscribe for those as they come out, and I will catch you guys in another one later on. Have a great day, and peace out, you nerds.